So yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself briefly to David, please.
Okay, I'll go first.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, David. I'm Trisha. I'm actually a geographer from the Humanities and Social Studies Education Group in NIE. I'm also the co-chair of the Sustainability Learning Lab at NIE. Currently, I'm working on an informal environmental learning project with NSSE, which is another academic group in NIE. I'm also working with the Geography and Science units at CPDD and the St. John's Island Marine Laboratory. Also concluding a project which has been pretty productive on fostering classroom talk in geography with the English Language Institute, which is at AST. So many partnerships, lots of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Hi, David, and good morning, everybody. So I'm Marilyn. I'm with the Ministry of Education's Corporate Research Office. So my office, in a nutshell, coordinates efforts across the ministry to conduct, support, and use research, and definitely bringing together researchers, practitioners, and doing our part to bring knowledge generated from research to policymakers is part of our work. But before my current stint with the Corporate Research Office, I was actually involved in curriculum development in areas of humanities education, citizenship education.
Nice, thank you. Welcome.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Monica Ong from NIE. I'm a teaching fellow with the Office of Education Research. Other than our teaching duties, we also engage in research studies and service work, like serving the School Partnership Unit and the Research Practice Policy Nexus Working Committee. So my research interests in the area of research use and impact, research practice partnership, and teacher learning. Thank you.
So,
thank you.
David, we thought this would be a good opportunity for the three panelists to raise some questions they have about partnerships and maybe related to some of the work that they're doing. I realized after inviting them all that it shows my bias towards humanities and social studies education. All of them have backgrounds in humanities education, and I've had the opportunity to work with all of them, but they come from different perspectives. So Trisha represents the academic groups, and she represents the Humanities and Social Studies Education academic group. Marilyn represents the Corporate Research Office at the Ministry of Education. She used to be in HSSE. And then Monica is a teaching fellow, and she works very closely with AST, especially around Singapore teaching practice and around some of the research seminars that we do with AST. But yeah, so I'll leave it to the panelists to maybe share some of their views, maybe some of the challenges they face or some of the questions that they have about partnering.
And I'd also like to hear from the panelists as well. You know, Mark and I have just answered some questions. What are your thoughts on some of those questions as well? Some of the thorny ones around recognition, around time to do this work. But let's start with your thoughts first.
Who'd like to go first?
Trisha.
Yeah, okay. So I think that without partnership, it's really difficult to do research. Personally, I have gained quite a lot from, really a lot from partnering MOE, whether it's CPDD or Alice, working with the master teachers at AST. I actually don't think that there is a dichotomy or a split in the work that I do in research and the work that I do in engaging partners and stakeholders. I think that it's really tightly bound, and the perspectives that I bring to bear in my research are also informed by what my partners are telling me, and then I see my job as turning that research in and translating that into practice, and then from practice back into research. So to me, it's been really symbiotic and really useful. And I don't think I would want to do research any other way. I mean, it's really challenging to do research with partners sometimes. And actually, one of the things that I also realize is that it's very cozy and easy to do research within NIE. It's also quite, I would say, institutionally, the systems are in place to do research with MOE. But the moment we go beyond that, right, we go across to NTU or NUS, I find that our systems, whether they are financial or HR systems, are not keeping up with this pivot. So what, in your experience, are the key systemic changes that you think will need to take place to realize this goal of more cross-institutional partnerships? But we can shelve that for later and let the other panelists ask their questions as well.
Mark, how would you like to proceed? Do you want a few comments on this right now, or should we?
I think a few
gather
comments. Yeah, you can respond to Trisha's question, and then we can go to another panelist. And yeah.
So you're, I think what we need is something you're already doing, which is you are that bridge. You and your partners are that bridge between research and its use, research evidence, and its use in practice and policy. But you referenced HR and finance, right? And oh yeah. I don't have a good answer for that at all. But all that to say is, I would think that if the institution has this as a strategic priority, and if you're finding that back-end systems are a barrier, like how do I get a teacher paid when they're not on payroll at NIE, right? Or how do I advance money to a parent group even before they've done any work? If those are issues, then I would say that would be something that you'd want to get some of the senior leaders within the research side to talk to the finance and HR. It's you need a strong advocate, and we're being recorded, so I'll be nice. It is the job of HR and finance to minimize risk to the institution. So their compliance functions, that's their job. Research has to embrace risk. Research asks new questions and it works in new things. And so the tension that you feel between the research functions and the finance and HR functions are not about the people there, it's just about they're doing their jobs, right? And so when you realize that they're just doing the job that NIE hired them to do, you can then sort of go, oh, it's not that person's being difficult. I had to think of a few words first. It's not that the person's being difficult, it's just they're doing their job. So how do we then recognize that work within the institution, recognizing that we're just doing our jobs, but how do we then start to push those envelopes? Marilyn.
I think I'll jump in next and maybe switch tracks a little bit and share one reflection and pose two questions for David. So I think my reflection really centers around how today's focus on the value of partnerships is really timely. And in my view, I think the increasing awareness that multidisciplinary perspectives are needed to address increasingly complex educational challenges and issues. I mean, it really pushes, I think, the value of partnerships, to new heights, and it challenges us to up our game, when it comes to optimizing the impact of research and building partnerships to achieve that. So I think on that note, I think I look forward to this circle of partners that we have in this space. And I think it's amazing for me to look at the list of people who sign up for this session and to look at people coming from all over. But at the same time, I also look forward to this circle expanding in time, to include researchers who might traditionally not do education research, but whose perspectives are really quite critical, for us to have that diverse range of perspectives to address very complex, increasingly complex educational questions. But at the same time, I think it'll be interesting to look at how the circle today, in today's session, would reconfigure and converge around the range of issues and topics that are featured in the breakout sessions, and to observe how the partnerships will deepen around those specific areas and questions. So related to that, I have two kind of questions, and the first question has to do with I've been thinking about, what is the pedagogy, or what are pedagogies involved, in the kind of generative conversations that we need, to drive discussions around research. So I think at the Corporate Research Office, we play the role of knowledge brokers also, and I think we recognize the need for us, to be able to, read the horizon well in terms of identifying new areas of focus, for research, and to be able to read the ground well, okay, and very importantly, to be able to engender conversations that can bring together parties who have a common interest, but who look at the research topic from different perspectives. So I think, we'll really love to hear your thoughts around how can we think about the kind of pedagogy that's involved in generating such conversations that can sustain and motivate people's interests. So that's the first question. The second question, very quickly, is really how do we approach thinking about a more holistic way of assessing research impact? Okay, and here I think your framework of the co-produced pathway to impact, I think, identifies some interesting ways of assessing impact. Instead of looking at the endpoint. Okay, of course, the endpoint in terms of benefits for the stakeholders in education is incredibly important. But how can we measure impact and be able to point out impact that occurs along that trajectory of the pathway to impact? Yeah.
Okay, second one, easy answer, because Mark, we did that, 6 weeks ago for NIE, but we didn't do it for MOE, right? So so short answer, Marilyn, is I don't evaluate, measure impact or assess impact. I collect and communicate the evidence of impact. And so it's just semantics, but it's important semantics.
Okay.
Can I go back to your first question? What do you mean by pedagogy? What is the pedagogy of this? What are you looking for when you say that?
Okay, so I mean, I asked the question from, my background as an educator, and in curriculum development, you think about pedagogical moves, they are essential, to achieving the learning outcomes, in any lesson. So in the context of a conversation, to generate be it ideas, or new research questions, or conversations to unpack, the research findings from any study. So we think very hard at CRO about the kinds of questions, okay, the kinds of questions that can generate conversation and keep everyone invested, in that conversation. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a pedagogy, but a method that I like to use when you're horizon scanning and you're looking for new opportunities is, have you heard of human-centered design methods?
Mm-hmm.
So human-centered design puts the human at the center of the design process. Whether you're designing new curriculum, you're looking for new opportunities, and there's methods that really allow that. You coming back to your word about multidisciplinary. You want to put multiple voices in the room. You want to put your outcomes at the center, and your outcomes are human-centered because they're probably learning outcomes. Mm-hmm. So you put the kids or the adult learners or learners from different communities. You put them at the center, and you think of their outcomes, and then you have the multiple voices around. And so I would say that human-centered design, and you can Google that, and there's all sorts of resources available, would be one way of approaching your question from a not theoretical, from a pedagogical perspective.
Thank you so much.
Monica.
Hi, David. I thought I can just talk briefly about the work in the school partnership unit. Based as a reflection of what you've just shared. I think since the inception of the school partnership unit about 4 to 5 years back, Dr. Tan Liang Si, who started it, brought together a core group of people with an understanding of how the other organization works. People who are aware of the different culture in the ministry, people who have an understanding of the general workings, the expectations, the lenses of the educational officers, the school leaders, and the teachers. And these are mainly our MOE teaching fellows. So because of their stints in the different levels of the education system, they have a good understanding of where our colleagues from the ministry are coming from. Together with their connections, their dispositions, and probably their outlook as well, they have helped to facilitate in building a sustainable partnership with our educational stakeholders. At the same time, I think we are also in a very good position where within our education system, we have MOE colleagues who have worked in NIE, and they are familiar with our people, our culture, our ways of working. So I guess this group of so-called boundary workers and spanners in both NIE and MOE who work across the research and practice domains, they serve as potential brokers between the research and the practice communities. So this enabling structures and roles that span the boundaries of practice and research should be viewed as our strength, something we should continue to leverage on. I guess another part about another point I'd like to surface would be about work of the research practice policy nexus working committee. So we view partnership activity as a form of joint work that requires mutual engagement across multiple research and practice boundaries. And we recognize that in boundary crossing, as one enters into the territory in which we are unfamiliar of, we face the challenge of negotiating the different contexts, and hence in design boundary zones like this, I guess we hope to initiate collaborations between MOE and NIE where respective institutional priorities are recognized, ideas can be shared, trust can be built, and collaborations could be stimulated. So these zones of network can also serve, I guess, as sites of mutual learning, a place where differences in interpretation and ways of knowing are surfaced, and which can also serve as focus of discussion. I have a question, David. You know, we have tried to disseminate NIE research to our colleagues in the ministry through various means. We have also attempted to create opportunities where we can co-construct research with our colleagues in the ministry. But how can we better facilitate the uptake of the findings, the eventual research findings among teachers, as we seek to make a positive impact on the quality of teaching profession and teaching practice? Thank you.
Thank you. So your second question was how can you facilitate the uptake of this evidence, was specifically for teachers. And I like how you use the word facilitate. I'll come back to that. But your first question, you described this wonderful, the boundary spanners, the brokers between your unit of the school partnership unit and some of the equivalent functions with MOE. Was your question about what's the value of this, or how do we promote that? Is that your question on the first bit?
Not really a question, but it's just an observation that I thought is a strength that I could continue to leverage on. Yeah.
So 100% agree. This is a huge strength that you have, not just for NIE, but for MOE, for AST, all your partners. It's what I imagine, what I hope you have is a table of these boundary spanners, of Monica, of Lorraine, and of your equivalents, your individuals, because creating those tables where you've already used the word trust, and you've talked about the word sharing. Right, so those tables where you can generate ideas in a trusted sharing fashion. So huge value of that. I don't actually know of anything that is quite that corporately structured, right, where those roots are very, very deep and corporate. What I would ask you to think about, and I don't think we have time now, is what's the relationship between the school partnership unit and the knowledge mobilization unit? And how did they work together, right? So that's a question to think about. To your second one, how do you facilitate the uptake? So we know from the literature in this space that dissemination is necessary, but not sufficient to inform change. So you can disseminate all of the information you want on biomarkers and neuroimaging, but if really the people at the end of the day want erectile dysfunction and biomarkers, they're never going to take it up. Right, so bringing those end users upstream to engage in the co-construction of the project is one way. But the other way is, and again, I won't go into this theory, but there's a theory that says if you want your evidence to be used, you have to facilitate the uptake of evidence in the context of its use. And so what we're good at, and again, I'll speak from my university, not necessarily from NIE, what we're really good at the university is we're going to hold a seminar on our campus and we're going to expect everyone to come to us, right? And we're really good at that. Well, what we try and do is facilitate the uptake of evidence in the context of its use. Get our researchers and students into government, into community, talking to parents, right? So presenting the evidence in a format that is not just accessible to them, that's dissemination, but really doing workshops, facilitating those workshops. So it's still a form of dissemination, but it's not this passive, I'm publishing it on my website. It's an active form of facilitated uptake.
Great, thank you, David.
You're welcome.
So I think, yeah, I think we have, yeah, okay, a question from Slido that has been pushed up, I think, for us to think about. How would you optimize university to university partnership? This is something that I think Tricia mentioned in her comments. So as to achieve tangible scholarly publication and research outcomes for academic faculty at both universities. Again, this has to do with our appraisal systems, I think, within universities and so on. Yeah, any thoughts about, I think, you know, this is, again, these are new boundaries that we're crossing. I think in many ways we're expected to do research with different schools and NTU, for example, as well as different institutes of higher learning in Singapore. Right. And so, yeah, any thoughts about that?
You know, my thought would be, so I'm guessing this question is coming from the perspective of we want to have academic recognition at both universities in both units, right? And so what I would say is, at the beginning of the collaboration, talk about what the end is going to look like, and where you want to publish it, how you want to publish it, and encourage that, especially if it's multidisciplinary, that if it's going into one disciplinary journal, that maybe professor from NIE is the lead author, but if it's going, and the other authors are co-authors, but if it's going into another journal that is in another discipline, that maybe that researcher can be the lead author, and then everyone else can be co-authors. Figure that out up ahead. At the beginning, because it saves the trying to do conflict resolution at the back end.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've run out of time, unfortunately, but I really appreciate the comments and the questions that the panelists have raised, and your responses as well, David. And I think for me, what this points to is that we're in the process of making several pivots from what we've typically done to kind of new terrain. And I think this idea of boundary crossing and so on is an important one. I think we're looking at more multidisciplinary research that doesn't involve just educational researchers necessarily at NIE or NIE and MOE, but really thinking about, you know, different forms of content expertise that can inform how we think about education issues. And that's going to be a pivot for us, I think, at NIE. It requires more of this sort of cross-institution, cross-agency kind of collaboration and research that will be very important. I think too, thinking more about how we can collect and communicate evidence of impact is going to be a big pivot for us, because we've been focused on certain kinds of metrics that have driven research and the work that we do. And I think what you're pointing to is, again, you know, really thinking hard about the evidence and how we can communicate that evidence among ourselves, but also with key stakeholders. And I think this pedagogy of facilitation, I think is, you know, this gets at Marilyn's question, you know, facilitating in context, I think is really important. And that's going to be a pivot for us too, to think about how can we better engage stakeholders in their context, not at NIE or not in our publications, but, you know, going out to schools. And again, I think, you know, schools partnership unit and the knowledge mobilization unit will play really key roles in this as we move forward. So at this point, I'd just like to thank everyone for a really rich discussion. And I think, yeah, thank you very much. I think you really raised some very pertinent questions, and I know they'll be very helpful for us to think further about as we move forward with this work. And I think at this point, I think Lorraine is going to step in and guide us to the next part of the program. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you all panelists and David for the very engaging time. And we're really sorry that we are not able to answer all the questions, but we do hope that this is the start of a conversation, and please do ask them, chat about them at your various breakout sessions later on.